Okay, real estate sales professionals, welcome to yet another edition of Ask Mark Anything. I've got a question here this evening that I think holds a lot of water, certainly for those real estate agents that are in areas where the market has now started to turn, and we're seeing what I would now refer to as either an oversupplied market or at least prices have come back. And there's lots of instances where people have either paid too much money and now have to get out of that situation, or have made a move and are trying to move inside of a marketplace where seemingly they've kind of missed the boat on numbers. And this, of course, causes a few issues with a lot of sellers. So the question comes from Bo Bremer, who asked us a beauty some time back, and I just want to say that there are some other questions that I've had out there that we will be addressing in the next series, but this one just seems to be pertinent because it just keeps coming up. And Bo has said, look, I have a problem. He's getting offers, lots of offers, and he calls them shit offers. Now, that's the first thing that I say that we need to pull up on. And he says, like, quite often they're $10,000 to $20,000, and on the price ranges that he's selling these properties on, below the advertised price, he's just having some trouble pulling up on them. And he says it's just doing his head in, and why isn't it coming on? And surprisingly, since this has actually hit the group, the return of the salesperson, there's been lots of responses from various salespeople putting their time up with it. And I've got to say, most of the things they're saying hold water. But, I think this is a forgotten art, and we're going to see more of this and need more of this as the market marches on, or we see certain conditions inside of it. And I think it's quite pertinent that this one came up in return to the salesperson, because I believe it's a salesperson that gets these offers across the line in markets where, or we've got an industry that's now starting to push, and there's lots of disintermediation going on. I mean, I think salespeople really play their role in getting a seller and a buyer together. And in many ways, what I teach at the List and Sell Tour is to get sellers to be expecting less than they might otherwise get, and of course, buyers to expecting to pay more. So the first thing that I said to Bo, and I'll just bring this up here so that I can just give this some sort of framing, because there's a whole lot of comments in there. I said, look, just before we get on here, there's a couple of things that I'd like him to maybe give some attention to in framing this up. And that was, here we go. The first thing was, I needed to have a sleep on it, but I'd answered this many, many times back on the other end of the GFC, when we saw a lot of this problems occurring with price and owners accepting them. And certainly in my day, makes me feel a little bit old, when we go back to the early 90s, and I had loads of properties that I had to get owners to accept prices that were well below par or what they were used to, on the back of what I called one of the biggest booms that I'd experienced to that point. And what I asked Bo to consider was this: look, did you take any shortcuts in the first instance on obtaining the listing? In obtaining the listing, were you giving assurances around price? Now, I'm the first to tell you that you should not be listing properties by way of price. You should not be focused on the price that the seller wants. Fundamentally, I say, as you'll hear as we go through this, you should be focused on the motive. At the end of the day, what we do is we get people moved. And in getting people moved, if you put the emphasis on the motive, and in fact, even figure out ways to feed that back to the seller, and in turn, get them focused on the motive, and price becomes secondary, well, the magic starts to happen. So I asked him if any shortcuts were taken. Did you openly say to them, look, I'll definitely get you a certain price, or no problem, that shouldn't be an issue? Now, I must say that even when he talked to me about this, and I saw some of these offers up there, they're in the 5s, the 600 range, and he's saying these offers are 10 or 20,000 below, I would have thought that they would have been embraced given the market condition. But that leads me to my second thing, and I say, look, are you clear on the raw and unadulterated motive behind them? Quite often when I see agents go into a negotiable situation, particularly with the owner of the property, they are not clear on the motive. Now, they're clear quite often on what I refer to as the superficial motive, That is the one that the owner has tendered to them. But have you really gotten down or dug down through the layers of that motive? You see, I say a motive comprises of three particular elements. The first is what or where they're trying to go or do. So what they're trying to do or where they're trying to go. Now, we all get that one. Most sellers will give us that one and volunteer it fairly readily. The second layer of a motive is basically why would you want to do that? Why it is that they have decided to embark on satisfying this motive. The third layer of the motive is when it has to be done by, the deadline. And I think this is all important basically in the context of the conversation we're going to have around this evening. When does it have to be done by? Now, you show me a seller that knows what or where they're trying to go or do, why they're trying to do it, and most importantly, when it has to be done by, and I'll show you somebody that has to sell the property. So that was the second thing that I asked him. The third thing was, what's the client's perspective around timing, which relates to that third question? It would appear to me that for them, perhaps these offers are perceived as coming too freely. You see, I guess what's happening is Bo's just getting the offers and so excited in the context of what's happening inside of the market insofar as he and his colleagues are concerned, that you rush down with that offer, you'd believe it's only 10 or 20 below, it's right on the mark, therefore it should be accepted. So we need to be very careful around this, remembering all the time that we need to be looking at what's going on from the perspective of the client. Even when it relates to timing, I quite often hear salespeople saying to me, the owners say they've got plenty of time, or the first offer comes through and we say, even if it's very close to asking price, we jump down there, we're so excited, and the owner says, you hit them with the offer and they say that's a good start, and we're thinking, well, that's a good finish. And that leads me to understand that, quite often with some of these buyers, you've been working with them for some time, you finally stumble upon the right house, they come up with the right number, and you're frustrated. Now, I've heard this articulated by people saying that, even though their property hasn't, from the seller's perspective, your property's only just come onto the market, the buyers have been in the market for some time. And whilst I respect that, I don't want to cave too early with the buyer either. For me, we're the middleman and we have to understand both sides of the game, when it's played and how to go ahead and play it. The last thing I said was, have you in each instance thoroughly and consistently communicated the market to the client? Now, what do I mean by that? Well, look, these offers might be coming in the first 2 weeks, they might be 3 weeks, they might be 4 weeks down the track. But are you very consistent in transferring what I refer to as relevant market information across to those owners? And are you also doing this in such a fashion that you're talking to them with such great regularity that they're seeking your advice? In other words, they're allowing you to control or influence the outcome because they're seeking advice on what they should do around these offers, rather than, as Bo has done, or I'm seeing him do in a couple of instances here, throwing the bomb in and just hoping that it does the job. Well, no, and in fact, as we go through this, I think it'll start to make some sense as to how I play this. So I focus on a 3-step plan. The first thing that I'm focused on is establishing what I refer to as a professional relationship. A professional relationship that is definitely commercial. We do this for money. It's definitely personable, but stay away from this personal aspect. You see, once you focus too heavily on creating a personal relationship with a seller, you're in a bit of strife. Why? Because friends don't deliver harsh news. Friends don't administer the blows. Whereas if you keep the relationship personal and professional, you can exercise that bedside manner and hit and expect the hard decisions to be made if and when and as required. So to do this, the first thing I do is I communicate a whole series of multiple angles. In fact, definitely in oversupplied markets with sellers when price expectations aren't being met, the very first thing you often hear from sellers is that the agent only ever wants to talk about price. Now, I've said this before and I'll say it again. Price definitely has to be addressed at some stage. I've always believed that any price, so long as it borders on sanity, a property should be listed under that guise, and we should allow the market to then determine back whether or not that price expectation is too high. In fact, for me, price is not much more than bait. So long as the bait is okay and we are getting buyers through and those buyers in turn are making offers, then I say the bait's okay. If it's not, then we have to bring it back in price. Now in this instance, the bait obviously is okay because buyers are making offers on the property. Now in making those offers on the property, yes, we have to address price as an issue with the owner, but in creating the personable relationship, we don't want to be seen to be sat purely and simply on the buyer's side. So one of the first things I do in communicating through multiple angles, I stay away from purely just hammering the fact that the price is either good or they should accept it, even in the context of them accepting it because that's what the market is saying. In fact, what I'd prefer to do is focus on the client's motive. That's a different angle. Look, I know that this number perhaps isn't ideal in the context of what we want, but the first question we have to ask is, at this price, are we able to move forward with our plans? Now, if that's the case, well then the number has to be considered in a favourable light insofar as the client's motive is concerned. What about timing? You see, many sellers say in the first 2 weeks, it's just too soon that the offer comes at them. So quite often when I make that initial offer, I have no intention of pressing acceptance whatsoever. I hit them with the number. If they blow up, if they arc up, if they say it's a good start, I say, yeah, fine. Yeah, to me, that was just a good start too. I wasn't asking you to accept the offer. I was just allowing you to understand that this is where we've started and we're going to move back to the buyer and move into there. The next thing that I do is I tap into their traumas. You see, many sellers have or expecting some sort of traumatic experience around that offer being put in front of them. So the next thing that I'll do is in putting the offer in front of them, I ask them, this might sound weird to some of you, how they feel. How they feel about the offer itself, how they feel about the circumstance, or how they're feeling generally, this comes back to another angle, from an empathetic disposition around the stress and how it might be feeling. Because of course, now if they tell me that, they're unsure or they're feeling a little awkward, I say, well, look, one thing we have to focus on is this. We've now found someone who will buy the property. And if we can get this price right, that motive that you're looking at the other end can now materialize. So to me, that's another angle that we have to look at. And in communication, and I think this is of utmost importance, I am calling sellers. So when I list my sellers, and this is for another discussion on AMA at some other time, I call my sellers every single day. Why? Well, if you call a seller every single day, you're going to build a relationship. Now, in the context of what we're talking about here, getting offers across the line, I'll be speaking to these owners 3, 4, sometimes as often as 5 times a day. But certainly 3 times a day, I'll be calling them and just keeping the whole negotiation process open and alive. I want them to feel the pressure. I want them to have the numbers on board, and if this negotiation experience is going to move overnight, if I haven't been able to set it up in the first instance, as we'll soon discover, well then I want them staring at the ceiling, chewing numbers over, rather than me staring at the ceiling, chewing numbers over. All right, the next thing is I want to really focus on uncovering the motive. So the first thing I want is that rating. Now we talked about that just a few moments ago when we started to get an understanding of what constitutes a motive. So I'll just reiterate very, very quickly. The first thing is having a clear-cut understanding of what it is they are trying to do or where it is they're trying to go. So much so, and I'll just move to this now even ahead of time, I also ask them to give me that motive in writing. So if I haven't done this, which I often do at the listing presentation, I'll slide a journal across and I'll ask them, look, can you just please write that down for me in big block letters so that we can all be clear on the objective we've set for ourselves around this negotiation. You see, it's not whether or not the price is right, it's whether or not what you've written down here can be satisfied by this offer that becomes important. The second part of the motive, of course, is why they're trying to do it. Now, if I'm saying, why would you want to do that? One of my favorite lines is to sellers, even in managing their price expectation, is what would you do if this doesn't work out? What are you going to do if this doesn't work out? Now, if they push back and they say, well, it has to work out, or I ask them, why would you want to do that? Well, they tell me they're where they want to move to. Why would you want to move to that suburb? Or why would you want to move out of area? Now, if they arc up and bite back, that tells me that they have a clear-cut understanding of why they're trying to do it. So we're kind of on the way in the context of this negotiation. The third part is, when does this have to be done by, which is also revealed by that question of, what are you going to do if this doesn't work out? So I say to them, look, here's the point. If we reject this, which I'm more than happy to do on your behalf. Now, I don't want us to be rejecting it just because we want to have more money than we're planned for. If this offer allows us to get on with our plans, I want us to consider it seriously, because I don't want us to be in this situation in 2 or 3 weeks' time, you looking back at me and asking me to reproduce this very same offer, but the cat or the horse has bolted. The cat's out of the bag or the horse has bolted. And I think this is very important. You'll see the context of this and how I marry it up shortly in a very specific close, if necessary, if warranted. I also run some what-if scenarios. Now, you've already heard me say, what am I going to do if this doesn't work out? Then I say to them, look, what if I had the buyer at, and maybe even name a bigger price, and just watch what they do? Let's just assume I go back. Now, I'm not saying this is going to be the case, but what if I go back and they say, yes, I'll pay, and it's a little bit higher? How would you react to that? And I want to gauge how they feel. Or importantly, I go, what if I go back, reject this offer, and they walk? What would you like me to do? Now, we've all been faced with that situation where the seller says, look, I won't accept that offer, but whatever you do, don't lose the buyer. This too is yet another red herring. But I hope that you're seeing here, definitely Bo, if you're watching this, how I'm engaging in conversation and opening up around a whole series of angles, how they feel, what the timing is, what their motive is particularly and specifically, and yes, I might be relating it back to price. I might also then talk about, as a multiple angle, the market condition. I might just, rather than even talk about their sale, talk about one where I had a seller in their position knock back an offer that was very close to what they wanted, allowed them to get on with their plans, but they dug in because they wanted that extra, and how that seller's still sitting there, or how they went on to accept a lesser offer at a later time, without any pressure on them whatsoever, just relaying it and keeping the client engaged around conversation. And thirdly, and not least of all, least important, I move then to effective communication. Now, this is part of my 3-step plan. So we've said professional relationship, we've talked about that. The second one is uncovering the motive and giving it some determination. Now, let me just put that into a rating system. If I've got somebody who knows what or where they're trying to go or do, why they're trying to do it, and when it has to be done by, that to me would be someone that I call a AAA or 3-star rating. Which tells me that they will not own this address within the next 6 months. I will do and say things to these people that would probably make some of you freak out, because that is a walking, talking commission check. If, on the other hand, I've got somebody who knows what or where they're trying to go and do, why they're trying to do it, but they really don't have a deadline, and they're saying to me, we've got plenty of time, or we're okay with chilling out and watching where it goes, well, then there's a little bit of work there. I've got to show them how this can materialize and how it can work, and maybe even have to engage the buyer on pushing them up in price as well. Okay, so we've got that rating. So it's 1, 2, and the 3rd star is if I've got somebody who knows what or where they're trying to do, they know why, but they have no deadline whatsoever in any way, shape or form. Well, that's a 1-star rating, and I don't get too heavy on them, because you're probably going to struggle to get an offer across the line. All right, so that's all in place. Now we move to effective communication. Now, I believe it's absolutely imperative that you have not just been talking to them every day, but importantly, you've been relaying specific information. Now, I know that if you're in Perth, Western Australia, now unless you've been hiding under a rock, these sellers would have to know that the market's come back in price. So what I often say to a seller is this: I say, look, I know that you're feeling like this offer's a little bit below par, But, you know, every property's been affected, and it's probably going to be affected if you are moving to another house. And I might even use some cheeky lines. Now, for some of you, this might be a little bit over the top, but I do ask that you consider it. Quite often I'll say to a seller, look, is your property located on an island just off the coast of the real estate market? Now, if they say no, I say, what, it's on this island? So in this case, it would be Australia. If you're in New Zealand, it would be the North Island or the South Island. So is it this island? They say yes. Well, if it is, then it's been affected like every other property. Surely you understand that these buyers are looking at other properties. Surely you understand that I'm not running a conspiracy to see you get less, and I've driven these people up to the highest price that I can. And you really need to consider this in the context of you being able to get on with your plans. The next thing that I do is I SMS sales results. I think this is absolutely imperative in the lead up. I make sure that every sale that is made by the office is at the very least in a text message sent through to all sellers I have on the market. Because one of the mistakes these guys make is they think that these offers are just going to be free flowing. And they also think that sometimes if they're not getting these offers in place and they're not seeing that other people are moving, that they can just dig in like everybody else. But of course, if they see that other people are accepting offers, other people are agreeing to sell, and these properties are moving on, well, then it works favorably, in the context of what you're trying to do. And last but not least, with every offer I get, and I see salespeople make this mistake over and over again, and certainly, Bo, if you've failed to do this, I've got to drive this one home. Ensure that with every offer, when you're going down to see a seller, if you want to give it its best possible chance, you make sure that you have a contract that has a signature on it, so it's been signed, and I don't care what the number is, as long as you've got the buyer up to the owner, make sure that the contract has been executed, and the biggest check that you can. Now, I've often taken down the entire amount as a deposit on a particular sale if I can possibly get it. So I make sure I have those three things. And this will become really important if we have to get to the point of pushing this across the line. All right, now we just move across, and I'll just get this little, oops-a-daisy, excuse me, thing up in safe. So we've gotten all those things, we've got it written down, we've got the motive written down, we can now feed this back to the owner. We're very clear on timing, we've run some of the what-if scenarios, we've got their reaction, and we are communicating with these sellers on different angles other than trying to just bash them on price. We've talked about timing, we've put an emphasis on their motive, and we should be engaging in good, strong conversation where they're feeling like you're clearly on their side. Now we can start to move to something that is, in my opinion, is one of the greatest closes that you can use in an oversupplied or pressured market as it relates to price. This is assuming that you've done everything you humanly can across with the buyer. What I often do with a seller, given that I have the signature, that I have the contract signed, and I have the check, I used to put these into a shirt box or something similar. And I would bring these down to the owner, and even if I relayed the communication, I would leave that contract, even if they're rejecting, behind with them overnight to babysit. In fact, sometimes I would think it more prudent not to even tell them the number. I would just turn up with the contract. As I drive the door, I've got a contract in here. I'd take it into the kitchen, leave it there, bring them outside and say, look, in that shoebox is a contract. It's been signed. The price that's on it, I don't think it's something that you're going to be overly happy about. But from what I can see in the context of what you're trying to do, I believe that this sale could come together. So what I'd ask you to do is just babysit that contract and think about it overnight. Now, of course, what happens? These sellers get up in the middle of the night, they're drinking a glass of water, and they're eyeballing that contract. They look back at it over and over again. They look at it together. They read through the details if necessary. They spend the night staring at the ceiling, and at the very least, they should by now at least prepare themselves for a contingency plan, or if you're lucky, you come back and they might just sign it. Now, when I come back to see them and I'm asking for the signature, if they look at me and they're saying, look, we just can't run with that, I then look at them both squarely in the eyes and say, well, look, if you're not going to sign it, what I'm going to ask you to do is pick up the check and the contract and tear it up into little bits. Now they balk when I say this, and they look at me kind of awkwardly, and I say, well, look, the reason that I want you to do this is I believe that this may not be the number that you're delighted with, but I know that this will allow you to get on with your plans. And the thing that's concerning me most is that in hindsight, you may look back at this moment and ask me to reproduce this very same offer again. Now, if they keep pushing and they actually pick the contract up as they go to rip it, I might even caution them, whoa, when was the last time you tore up 650,000? So it's quite dramatic and lots of things go with it. But if push comes to shove and they won't go ahead and sign it, I do have them tear it up. Now, the reason that I do this is not only is it demonstrative, not only does it really drive the point home, if they do tear it up, I used to put that contract back into a shirt box. I'd go back to the buyer, I'd lift open the shirt box and I'd say, here's the answer on your offer. I'm pretty sure the owners have said no. And what would the buyer then do? Well, this would invoke the fight in them quite often if they really fell for the house, and quite often they would come up with that extra money. But at the very least, it would be demonstrative. Now, just coming back to that seller, the other thing that I would do these days is if they went to tear it up, I'd also pick my phone up and I'd go to film them. And if they looked at me in horror, I'd say, why? I said, well, I want to film this because in a couple of weeks when you ask me to reproduce this, I'm going to show you this photograph, I'm going to show you this film back, and you'll clearly see why it is, you should have listened to me right now, because I want you to understand this is not me telling you not to do it. This is me advising you to think about this heavily and, importantly, probably take the decision to move ahead with this. So I hope you've enjoyed that. I hope that helps, Bo. There's plenty more. So what I'd like you to do is maybe start with this, and I've articulated this in writing. I'll get this across. I'll post it up to the Return of the Sales person so that you can all have a look at it. And there's a little bit more that goes with it, but that's my 15 minutes before I go out and see my beloved Swans take the paddock to win the flag. So join me again next week. I'm sorry this has been a little bit rushed on Ask Mark Anything. Thanks for joining me.